We are sharing a grant with the Community Foundation to do a Metropolitan-wide youth regional assessment. So basically our question is like, what are youth saying is going on in the region? So it's like an assessment designed by youth for youth to say like, what are the biggest issues in the region and how do we want to address them? So we brought together youth from all over Metro Detroit. So we have youth from Dearborn, Farmington, Hamtramck. Is that what you said?
Hamtramck and Dearborn, I think.
Hamtramck, Dearborn, Southwest Detroit, West Bloomfield, all over. So we kind of have this core group who we've been meeting 2 times a month, 3 times a month, depending. And we kind of started out by saying, like, what do we want to know? And like, what are the big issues that we're seeing right now in the region? So some of the big issues they came up with were things like transportation, community engagement, education, diversity issues. What else, Angela? Health.
Fun stuff for youth to do.
Yeah, like entertainment, fun things for youth to do. And then we kind of worked from there and said like, okay, what are some questions under each of those things? So we've spent a lot of time like workshopping together to like come up with these questions. So where we're at right now in the process is we've created a survey and we've had a couple different drafts of it at this point to say like, okay, these are the questions we think we want to ask. This is how we think we want to ask them. We've piloted the survey with a couple different groups of youth. To say like, okay, is this working? Is this getting the information that we want to be getting? Because really where we hope to go from here is to say, okay, so we had 1,000 plus youth fill out this survey and what we're finding is X, Y, and Z. Youth are saying, you know, that one of the biggest issues in the region is a lack of transportation that's keeping them from being engaged in their community. And from there, we really hope to develop some like policy recommendations for like stakeholders in the metro area. And then what are some additional ways we want to gather information? Like, do we want to hold town hall community meetings to hear people's feedback? Do we want to do like some videos like we talked about? I would say our age range in the group is probably like 16 to 21 or so. We found it really helpful because we want it to be a metropolitan-wide survey. It's been really important for our group to have representation from all over because kids in Farmington have different issues than a kid in Southwest Detroit. So we found it really helpful to have, you know, that mix of kids to be able to say like, well, these are issues that I'm seeing, so we need a question about, like a kid in Farmington rarely is saying we need a question about safety. So they come up with different things that they really feel like need to be on the survey. So right now we're in the process of like coming up with our final draft of our survey, and then we've been spending some time saying like, how do we want to get this out? So like, what are your different networks? How formally do we want to do it? How informally do we want an online version and a paper version? All those things. And then the plan is to, once we get, you know, X amount back, kind of start to make sense of it and then say like, okay, so from what we're seeing, whether it's kids are saying that their schools are unsafe, what sort of recommendations do we have? And our hope is to use media in various forms throughout the process and at some point to hold kind of like a media town hall to share out with stakeholders like, here's some recommendations we came up with. One group that we piloted the survey with was youth from the Community Foundation, from the Youth Advisory Committee. So some of the people like Angela and Dana and Charlie who are on that board are a continual part of the process. And we're gonna like kind of see if there are other ways that the other youth want to continue to be involved. The other group that we piloted with was a group that came to U of M for MLK Day, who had been kind of like a wide range of our community partners who we've worked with in the past. So for those groups, it was a pretty like natural part of all the other work that they do with us. We also did say to people like, if you want to continue to be involved in other ways with this survey, we'd love to have you. So we are totally open to continuing to involve more youth in a variety of different ways, like as we move forward. My thought was that I would show you guys the pilot survey where we're at right now, and you can either take it or just like take a look at it. And I would love if you guys are open to hear some of your feedback, because for us it's really helpful to have a variety of eyes looking at it and to say, you know, this is what I'm thinking, especially because like we want it to be representative of youth across the region and we want as much variety of youth input as possible. So does that sound good to people? Okay, I'm gonna pass it out.
So I think one thing that's kind of missing is like maybe in the recommendation section, a question about what are the solutions that already exist in the community that are working?
Oh, that's a great one.
Because I think oftentimes, like, I mean, no offense to the foundation or any
No,
of the
it's
groups,
great.
but there's a lot of innovative stuff happening at the grassroots level in community groups that don't necessarily have connection or access to these systems. So, and I think youth know what's working and what's...
I think that's great. Thank you. Do other people have feedback? That's what I want to hear. Okay, Kevin.
When you talk about like safety in the communities and like the neighborhoods or whatnot, like for some people like that, what is considered like a safe neighborhood is considered like a lot different, because for someone a safe neighborhood might be seeing police
right
rolling around the corners,
Right.
But for someone else that might be that's complete opposite, So I
Right.
think coming up with definitions about like things like that could be drastically different depending on like your various intersecting identities and where you live at, would probably be a better way to get.
Well, and then part of me wonders, like, is that something that you can capture in a survey, or is that something that we need to try and hit from like a meeting angle? You know what I mean?
I think like when you ask the question, like even the first question, like all young people should be able to have a voice in their education, and it's like, do you strongly agree? I think there should be like a line or something where they can explain like,
Right.
why do that? Because a lot of times we, like I said before, like we just go, I'm a youth who wants people to hear my voice, and then strongly agree. And you really don't strongly agree. You kind of want to explain why.
So do you think it would be helpful to add, like, at some of the sections we have like additional comments?
Yeah, I
Should we
think
just add something like that at the bottom of this section?
Yeah, like at least I would assume like every section should have like 2 lines where they can
Right.
express why they chose. I like the fact that it's not like about not about Detroit, like. So.
Well, and I think we've really taken the approach that like, for change to happen, it needs to be regional. Because if you're just Farmington Hills and you're just looking out for Farmington Hills, and you're just Detroit and you're just looking out for Detroit, like each community has its own, resources and benefits. And so we really take the approach that like everyone needs to be involved in order to make regional change. And so you get a very different picture of what are our strengths and what do we need to work on when you're looking at the regional level.
How are you going to implement the feedback that you get to actually be worthwhile? Because everybody comes from different schools and every school has.
Yeah, that's a good question. So a couple different things. One, we're really going to have to spend time to say, like, with the information that we got, what do we want to work on? Because, there's going to be a lot of different information and lots of different things, so we're going to have to kind of prioritize. One piece of it is going to be grant making.
Perhaps there is one really big issue that keeps coming up. How do we solve that? And we can help solve that in another way through grant making. So how does this group come together and put out and say, maybe the number one issue is education, or maybe the number one issue is safety or transportation. Youth, put together some grant proposals and let's solve it and try and fund it. So there's lots of different ways to use the information. So one of the ways that we all talked about was, how do you take action on it?
Maybe it could go back to your idea of like, how do youth continue to stay involved after they take this survey? So if the information then comes back to them about what the results came back on a metro-wide level, and then they are seeing that's exactly what's happening in my community, and now they have an opportunity to take action based on a grant that they may be able to apply for, or whatever
Right.
it may be, and that they'll be able to see that there's others like them with these same struggles, and maybe I don't think we've decided, but maybe there's a network that comes out of that.
Right.
So, Donnie, what do you think about the notion of if we put what organization you're affiliated with, like came from Michigan Roundtable, and then maybe some of those broader issues that come out, we can say Michigan Roundtable identified some of these as core issues, and so did Novi Public Schools, and connecting them that way. Or do you think that reduces the anonymity?
No, I think that's a good idea.
So we could put something on here that says like, for more information, contact, or if you want to be involved, contact.
Oh, interesting. Or even the idea of having different like hubs of places to go to.
Yeah.
So
Resources,
it's
basically.
yeah.
And that also kind of puts the responsibility on the people that are taking the survey to like follow up with it, which a lot of people, like I know when I was like in high school, I might have wanted to, but I might not have actually done anything with it,
I'm wondering if it makes sense to add like give us an example. Because so I'm looking at this one, like I have opportunities to be involved in decision making at my school. And so like some of the young people I work with are like, heck yeah, we get to choose when our dance is. But like in terms of like broader systemic decision making, it's just that they haven't been conditioned to think about what are the systems in which they can make decisions.
Yeah, right.
So I think we could guide some kind of like focus group questions afterwards.
So how do you broaden the type of students you have? Because you can have an A+ student that can help all of this stuff only because like the position they have, but it may be that same person even in the same class or same grade that won't have those opportunities and stuff like that. So how do you make sure that you're not just talking to somebody that basically has everything?
Right. So you're saying like what happens, let me make sure I get this. So like what happens a lot in schools is like the A+ students are the ones who are like asked their opinion on things, they like have input, and then a student in the same school might have like no input on anything because they're not an A+ student.
Yeah.
But I think the benefit
That's a
with
good
that is
question.
like because it's regional, so we're not only targeting like the A+ kids, the kids who aren't the A+ kids, they also get a chance to like have their voice heard. So everyone gets a chance like to speak up.
So that's part of what you guys are doing, right, Angela? You guys are targeting a variety, so the sample will be more spread out. So it's, so the average then is a C instead of A's and then a few D's all across the spectrum.
Well, and I also think my hope, at least, is that like some of that stuff will get teased out in not necessarily in the survey, but more in like a focus group or video interviews or wherever, because then someone will say to me, well, the only people who get input in my school are kids who are A+ students. Well, I'm not going to maybe get that from a survey, but that's why we hope to have those supplemental things, I think, to get some more of that kind of information. Yeah.
My question goes back to her point as far as engaging the students that are already engaged. I mean, it might not necessarily be an A+ thing, but more so these are the people that already acknowledge that they have us, that they need to have a say. But how do we get the disengaged people?
Right. And that's part of where we're at now, is starting to think about strategy in terms of getting the survey out. And where we've kind of started is to say to the different youth on our team, like, what are your networks? So like one of the girls on our team, like, was a hockey player for forever. So she's like, well, I have all my hockey people. So we kind of hope to start that way and kind of like snowball it. If all this survey goes out to is the diversity club at this school, you're gonna get very different answers than if you were to get the study hall class at the same school. So we have to play with some of that still, and we wanna make sure to get as wide a range as possible, because I totally agree, like we're gonna get completely different answers if we're getting all A+ students who are in diversity clubs and play a sport. The reality of it is a group of adults is more likely to listen to whatever we're saying if we can say we have 2,000 youth survey responses. Like, that's powerful. And it's hard for a group of adults to like discount that information when you're like, no, 80% of this group of 2,000 youth that we, pulled all over the region said this.
So some of the stuff that we talked about in here and then in your session before, the whole afternoon is going to be about kind of constructing and showing some examples. So, Katie, who was in here before, and Becca, they're going to show some examples of how this has worked, both nationally and locally. So, and some of it will be how Jessica talked for a minute about how do you visualize it or capture it. So some of that stuff, you might want to circle back with Angela and Becca and say, hey, what would be really far more effective for your survey is this, this, or this. Or I know you guys are thinking about doing grant writing or grant proposals. It might be cooler to have something more visual like this. So those are all things that we're open to. And because it's about youth, it would be better to have youth actually influence the end product.